The Central Coast is one of the most pristine marine ecosystems anywhere in the world, but local communities are becoming alarmed about the prospect of offshore oil and gas exploration right here off the coast. We spoke with Tobias, Director of Asset Energy, the company behind 3D seismic testing. We asked Mr. Foster why Asset Energy are so keen to drill for oil and gas in New South Wales.
The majority of gas in Queensland is being exported out of the Gladstone as LNG to Asian nations. The supply of natural gas into New South Wales has predominantly been from Victoria, and we know that those fields are declining in reserves. What a discovery of natural gas would do for the local gas prices with the backdrop of LNG export affecting gas prices is that we will be able to, pending reserves and engineering of course, be able to offer a local source of gas that can compete highly favourably with the netback pricing of LNG and provide a cheaper energy source to the state of New South Wales.
We're aware of a number of projects that are coming to production stage onshore in New South Wales, in the Pilliga and other regions. Is there any need for offshore oil and gas production?
Absolutely. It's continued supply of natural gas will ensure secure energy for the state of New South Wales for decades to come.
The Federal Resources Minister has described the Central Coast as the next Bass Strait oil field. Is that an accurate description? We think so through some of our exploration works that we've done to date in terms of there are significant structures from the early two-dimensional seismic work that has been performed in this region stretching back to the 80s. We know from the onshore portion of the sedimentary Sydney Basin that it contains significant quantities of hydrocarbon-bearing potential source materials such as coals, which can evolve gas into traditional sandstone reservoirs that we would like to test ultimately. How much gas might be there?
In the order of multi-trillion cubic feet, and that's a very significant resource in anyone's language.
The most immediate concern to local communities is the prospect of 3D seismic testing. This involves large vessels towing an array of air guns that make repeated blasts of up to 250 decibels every 10 seconds for weeks on end over a 1,000 square kilometre area adjacent to the East Australian Current. We asked Toby Foster about the status of 3D testing.
We are at the stage where we are preparing the environmental plan. We are determining how and when we wish to go about doing that at the moment. Of course, in that process we need to, as per the federal regulations, we need to engage with community, with all the relevant persons or stakeholders and provide or present an environment plan to the national regulator for assessment.
Your own environment plan cites a long list of scientific studies that, taken together, conclude that seismic testing causes devastating and lasting damage to the marine ecosystem. How can you conclude that it's safe?
I don't agree with the premise that we're implying any damage to the marine environment through a seismic survey. We certainly understand that seismic energy, or the energy from acoustic noise release, can have impacts on the marine ecosystem. For example, we understand that whales and many marine creatures rely on acoustic communication methods. We understand that the noise as an energy source can disrupt particular organisms in particular contexts. What we have to do in our environmental plan process is understand each of those risks, determine how we can mitigate against them, and ensure that we have control measures during any activity to ensure that any impacts we have on any marine organism or the ecosystem are managed effectively and acceptable to the environmental regulator.
There's also a myriad of anecdotal evidence from commercial and recreational fishers that talk of dead fish and a complete loss of sea catch for 6 months or more after seismic testing. What study is there that can refute that type of evidence?
One such document has come into public domain recently by the Geoscience Australia, CSIRO and other representatives that have determined actually, or have presented a study on the effects on commercial fish catcher in the Victorian Bass Strait region, and what that demonstrated was that there was no adverse impact on catch rates of a number of commercial fish species shortly after the seismic survey, and surprisingly actually indicated an increase in potential commercial catch rates of some species.
As we learnt more about the Perth-based company behind the exploration activity, we found a complex array of corporations and relationships. It appears the company has spent over $30 million so far in its search for the reservoir, and now has had to enter into what's known as a farm-in agreement with another company, RL Energy, to finish seismic testing. We asked Toby Foster who RL Energy is.
Sure, RL Energy is a private Australian company. They scout around for petroleum titles and look to gain an interest in those titles, and then contribute to works on those titles to improve their value, and ultimately either produce petroleum products from those titles or on-sell them to other entities for an improved capital gain.
Our understanding of the farm-in agreement is that for $4 million of contribution to the cost of seismic testing, that RL Energy will finish up with 60% ownership of the company. How are shareholders feeling about that loss of control or handing over that much of the company to RL Energy?
Shareholders, well, they've accepted the farm-in agreement. They voted in favour of the farm-in agreement. So the majority see this as a positive step forward to exploring for natural gas in this area.
Who is Greg Shannon, and what role did he play in securing the farm-in agreement?
Greg's the chairman of RL Energy and chief decision maker ultimately at RL Energy. As you are probably aware, Ross, through your research, he was previously a director of Advent Energy. He recused himself from any discussions surrounding PEP11 at a point when his interest in PEP11 from his own commercial reasons was made. So we're very comfortable that the governance behind any relationship between Advent Energy and Asset Energy and RL Energy is sound.
In the company records with the ASX, there's reference to an expert industry report that suggests that 3D is not necessary, not required around PEP11, that it's simply a case of drilling a test site. What do you say to that?
The three-dimensional seismic data is a bit like colour TV compared to grainy black and white. We have confidence that a three-dimensional seismic survey will both improve our knowledge of any producibility of or existence of commercial quantities of hydrocarbons in this location, and ensure that when or should we encounter commercial quantities of hydrocarbons, that the development thereof is achieved as efficiently, safely and effectively as possible.
I guess you can see the picture though, that you've gone from a $20–30 million drilling exercise to a $4 to $8 million seismic testing, and now you've handed over 60% of the company to RL Energy to do that for you. Could people conclude that the company is just simply running out of money?
Well, the financial accounts of the group are available for public consumption.
Coastal communities of New South Wales are worried about more than just seismic testing. They are beginning to fear the catastrophic effects of a disaster like the one recently experienced by the Deepwater Horizon well in the Mexican Gulf. We asked Toby Foster how they would prevent such a disaster recurring.
Now, in terms of a seismic survey, then there's no risk to a natural hydrocarbon release as a result of that particular activity. As a consequence of drilling, of course, when we are penetrating the geological strata, we do need to ensure that that procedure is undertaken safely and effectively. We have to prepare an oil pollution prevention plan as part of any environmental plan for our petroleum activity. There would naturally be response mechanisms in that environmental plan and oil pollution prevention plan to mitigate against any potential spill.
Are there actually any assets in place in Newcastle or on the Central Coast to respond to a major gas leak?
There are systems in place. The National Oil Pollution Plan is in place. Until we get to the drilling, I suppose our key focus at the moment is the next exploratory works, and in terms of the drilling planning process, we'll ensure that all assets, both globally, regionally, Australia-wide, and locally, are in place and ready to act should the worst eventuate.
The people on the Central Coast naturally look to the Deepwater Horizon episode in the Mexican Gulf, and where the emergency response was shown to be woefully inadequate. How do you give them comfort that this would be any different?
Sure. The industry continues to learn, it continues to evolve, it continues to improve technology, procedures and practices. As a result of the Deepwater Horizon incident you mentioned, the Montara spill in 2009, I believe it was as well, NOPSEMA improved and changed its regulations to guard against those sorts of uncontrolled hydrocarbon releases.
I think in the event of such an event, we could assume that the company would fold and wouldn't exist anymore, and there would be no one to do that clean-up or to seek recompense from.
That won't happen.
There are now over 100,000 people who are publicly protesting or signing up to petitions on the Central Coast to stop seismic testing. How are you responding to that public backlash?
In terms of the local backlash, now obviously we undertook a two-dimensional seismic survey in PEP11 in April 2018. We certainly were aware of local interest groups that were concerned about our operations, and we anticipate that that will only continue into the future.
What would it take you to walk away from PEP11?
I'm not sure why there would be any reason to.
One might be that there's anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million people who are going to, in coming months, beg you, firstly, not to do 3D testing, and if that's successful, not to establish an oil and gas industry on their doorstep.
Australia must maintain energy security. It must maintain provision of raw materials for manufacturing industry, and to ensure that our energy prices are kept as low as possible. So I think people must maintain that in the back of their minds when understanding what the petroleum industry provides for Australia.
So Asset Energy is determined to forge ahead with a new EP for PEP11, and so it would seem there's little joy on the horizon for people on the coast. I'm Ross Barry, and this is Community News Partners.